that we know from what history tells us that this will not be the last time we see abortion used this way politically, I think, frankly, should terrify anybody who wants to have a family, who wants to be able to have safe pregnancies, who wants to be able to see families flourish.
One for mum, one for dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. Australians overwhelmingly support access to abortion care, which is legal throughout the country. But in recent years, Australia's seen a resurgence of anti-abortion politics.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the slavery debate of our time.
Many states do ban it from 4 weeks. Are you in?
I'm not advocating the time at the stage, but I can tell you, even from 20 weeks, I think it's too late to have an abortion.
This is a victory for restoration of morals and ethics in this state and to show people that we can move things back in the right direction.
Just last week, a bill to restrict late-term abortion was defeated in the South Australian House of Representatives after abortion became an election issue earlier this year. And in New South Wales and Queensland, there's been attempts to restrict abortion rights in recent years as well. And federal One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts told a Brisbane Christian conference that he wants his party to move to ban abortion entirely. So is access to safe legal abortion in Australia coming under serious threat? Joining me today is Australia Institute Chief Political Analyst Amy Remeikis. G'day, Amy.
Hello.
And Australia Institute Postdoctoral Research Fellow Hamdi Jama. G'day, Hamdi.
Hello.
Amy, I want to start with you. Obviously, we've got the recent events in South Australia as well as other moves in Queensland and New South Wales. But in South Australia, tell us a little bit about where this bill came from and how it fits in to what we're seeing happen around the country.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing happen around the country is what we've seen happen in the United Kingdom, what we've seen happen in the United States, which is a bit more of the far right, open conservatism sneaking into not just our discourse, but also to our politics. There has always been an undercurrent in Australian politics about wanting to ban abortion, which has never got a huge head of steam. There's been lots of rallies that have been usually run by lobby groups like the Australian Christian Lobby and other religious right lobbies, but it's never actually crossed over into the mainstream in a way that you would consider it a threat to legislation or a threat to the right to healthcare in Australia. And we saw a lot of support politically for states that were dragging the chain on equalising their rights, like Queensland, where abortion was still criminalised, up until quite recently in modern political times. You saw a lot of support to try to unify that around the nation to be like, no, healthcare is healthcare. You should have access to it. The last time we saw this become a political issue was probably when Tony Abbott was health minister and there were attempts to prosecute people for accessing what is, colloquially known as the abortion pill, which is just medication for very early term abortions, where there was attempts to penalise and prosecute young women who were attempting to access healthcare. That was the last time that we probably saw it in the mainstream, but we have seen a pretty big uptick in this sort of stuff coming from either conservative liberals or from One Nation candidates who have made it into parliaments. And now suddenly it's popping up in the states again. And the states is ground zero for abortion rights because it's up to the state what they allow. And so for what we've seen, in South Australia is Conservatives start to take what is quite a fringe issue on the Christian right introduce it into Parliament under the idea that this is rational and this makes sense. And so one of the more recent ones that we've seen, particularly in New South Wales, is, we need to ban sex selection abortions, which is not an issue on the numbers. On the very rare times that there has been sex selection given as the notification, it's because of chromosomal disorders which are attached to particular genders. There's a medical reason by and large for all of this. Not that it has to be. Abortion is a choice and it's healthcare. But in terms of the sex selection debate, more often than not, it is because of chromosomal disorders that people do not want to risk for their child. And that is being used, as we've seen with the South Australian one, as this is simple, this is reasonable, this is understandable. We're going to start quarantining who can have abortions and for what reasons. South Australia was very similar. Quarantining who can have abortions and for what reasons. And what abortion advocates, healthcare advocates all say is that if you start to allow the little slippage of who can have abortions, where you take it out of doctors' and patients' hands and put it in the hands of legislation, it's a very easy slope to start basically narrowing who can get an abortion at all, or if at all, as Malcolm Roberts is currently suggesting is what he wants One Nation to start taking up.
Yeah. So, Hamdi, the bill in South Australia was focused on abortions later in pregnancy. What does the law in South Australia say currently, and how common, do we know from the statistics how common abortions later in pregnancy are?
Yeah, so the abortion laws in South Australia are pretty well established. So if you want to get an abortion after 22 weeks and 6 days, so let's say 23 weeks, you have to meet some strict criteria that 2 doctors have to agree to. So this includes that the termination is necessary to save the life of the pregnant person or another fetus, that there is significant risk of physical or mental injury to the pregnant person, and that there is a significant risk of fetal anomalies. So these circumstances are incredibly rare, and when we look at the data, it's actually less than 1% of all abortions that are in South Australia that were recorded for the year of 2024. These are obviously quite serious circumstances and should be cases that are discussed between the pregnant person and their doctor.
Yeah, not much room for a politician in the middle there. But I want to ask, because I know abortion was decriminalised and made legal with huge consultation with the healthcare and medical industry at the time. So what did healthcare groups in South Australia have to say about this bill in particular?
So overwhelmingly, doctors, abortion providers, peak medical bodies all publicly opposed this bill. I'll just read a quote from the president of the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Gynecologists, Dr. Nisha Kott, who said, "Restricting access after 25 weeks does nothing but increase harm and distress. It risks delaying care, it compounds trauma, and it forces patients into situations that compromise both their physical and mental well-being."
It's clear that none of the doctors support this bill because of the way it interferes, I guess, with them being able to make sound medical decisions and provide care to people. Amy, it was voted down decisively in the lower house. It did pass the upper house. It was supported by both the Premier and opposition leader in South Australia.
My view has always been that abortions should be safe, legal and rare. And I've had particular concerns around very late-term abortions.
What this proposal would have done would be to add another guardrail at 6 months, which I believe is sensible.
Do we think this is the last of anti-abortion legislation that we'll see in South Australia?
No, and I don't think it's the last anti-abortion legislation we'll see in parliaments across Australia. The South Australian legislation was never going to pass both houses of parliament. There is not enough mainstream support. And for people who might be surprised that Peter Malinauskas, a Labor Premier, support it, he is from the Shoppies faction, which is primarily Catholic. They're primarily one of the more conservative factions within Labor. And as one Labor MP said to me after the vote, once a shoppie, always a shoppie. So it was not surprising that Peter Malinauskas did this. There's also a sense within the mainstream political parties, so both the Coalition and Labor, although there is more natural sympathies towards wanting to restrict abortion on the Coalition side, but there is a sense that by neutralizing what they consider to be neutralizing some of these issues by showing that there is support in the mainstream for, restricting abortion, by having some Labor MPs exercise a conscience vote to be able to support abortion restriction legislation, that it might help to further neutralize the issue politically in the broad, which of course is ridiculous because everybody knows that the moment that you start basically capitulating or trying to compromise on these issues, you just see them go further and further and further. And that was one of the issues that was really worrying political watchers and healthcare advocates that I spoke to, because the moment that you start making one restriction, then it becomes very easy to start going after healthcare providers by claiming that they're doing the thing that has just been restricted, whether there is evidence or not. And we have great test cases for this in reality in what is currently happening in mostly red states in the United States, where it is exceptionally difficult for women to access legal abortions. That does not mean abortion stops. Abortion will always continue, whether it is legislated or not, but safe abortion stops. Healthcare, be having access to healthcare and doctors and trained professionals, that's what stopped. And in the United States, we've seen women die. We've seen women be prosecuted for miscarriages or stillbirths. We've seen women suffer or stillbirth. We've seen women suffer all sorts of adverse health impacts or lose their fertility altogether because they've been unable to access healthcare in the event of a pregnancy issue or a miscarriage. And as somebody who, has had quite a few problems when it comes to fertility and who has had to access what we consider abortion care, which is if you miscarry, you often have to go and have what they call a D&C, which is the same as what happens in abortions when it's beyond like that 6-week term or so. Not having access to that is frankly terrifying. And I think that for a lot of women who have been in this situation, a lot of people who've been in this situation, these are much wanted pregnancies where something has gone catastrophically wrong and you're having to make a very tough decision using the best advice of healthcare at the time. And the fact that we know from what history tells us that this will not be the last time we see abortion used this way politically, I think frankly should terrify anybody who wants to have a family, who wants to be able to have safe pregnancies, who wants to be able to see families flourish, because this is not just an individual issue. This is something that impacts so many more people than I think people realize, which is why it should be a healthcare decision.
That's right, Amy. I know in the United States, as you mentioned, the idea of women being prosecuted for miscarriages and stillbirths is deeply, deeply horrifying. And as you say, it's oftentimes in the cases of very much wanted pregnancies where there's just no way to foresee at the beginning of a pregnancy the kinds of medical complications someone will experience. And sometimes they're life-threatening. Sometimes you might get like a cancer diagnosis out of nowhere. And I think there's kind of a misperception or a misconception that, promoted by people who oppose abortion, that this is all, just young promiscuous women who are using it as a form of birth control, when the reality is sometimes it might be people with 2 kids already who really want a third pregnancy but develop preeclampsia, or there's severe fetal abnormalities. And this doesn't just impact on people who require abortion care, but because medical professionals are being prosecuted, sometimes it means even care for a healthy pregnancy is not available for women. So the consequences are really far-reaching for healthcare in general, including healthcare professionals.
There's been an explosion of fury and fear on the streets across the United States. Tens of thousands of people condemning the Supreme Court's decision to overturn a landmark ruling on abortion rights.
The court upheld Mississippi's ban on abortions after 15 weeks by a 6-3 vote, and 5 of those justices went even farther, voting to overturn Roe v. Wade itself.
With Roe gone, let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk.
Well, I did something that nobody thought was possible. I got rid of Roe v. Wade. And by doing that, it put pro-lifers in a very strong negotiating position.
And I just want to ask you, because so much of what we know about what goes wrong comes from the United States, how much is that influencing what we're seeing here in Australia, Amy?
All of the culture wars that we're seeing in Australia have a genesis in the United States. It's one thing that we have seen with the advent of social media and, algorithms that are really starting to target these pinch issues. We see anything that's an issue in the United States or the United Kingdom pretty much just gets imported here with the same debates, the same arguments, almost the same spokespeople for, what they're saying, and the same messages. There's a lot of message testing that goes on with this, and one of the most insidious ways that they're currently doing it with abortion, which worked in the United States, is that it's reasonable. It's reasonable to start restricting abortion under these terms. And then once you win the reasonable debate, it's very easy to then move it further and further and start restricting abortion on almost any terms, which is what we have seen in the United States. And there is always pushback. There is always people who say it's not being used for birth control. Sometimes it's for healthy pregnancies. But overwhelmingly, politically, the message should be it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter why you want to access abortion healthcare. It is up to the individual's choice, and it is your choice whether or not you continue that pregnancy. And you don't have to have a reason that you need to justify to the world about why you may or may not want to continue a pregnancy. And so I think what we're seeing in the United States in abortion, we're going to see a lot more here. It is very obvious from the tactics that are being used by the anti-abortion crowd. I mean, we've seen Barnaby Joyce stand up in front of illustrated fake twins, Emma and Ruth, claiming that this was, a pregnancy that was aborted, and then the mother experienced regret, and that's become one of the main illustrations. But we also know from reporting on The Guardian that the original post, which was saying, I regret doing this to my twins, was using sugar glider newborns, not human newborns. But it is something that in social media was able to take off. And now we're seeing, people like Barnaby Joyce stand in front of images of these fake twins saying, this is what we are fighting for. This is very similar to what happened in the United States in the lead up to Roe v. Wade being overturned. And it doesn't have to overturn it federally in Australia. And that's why they're not aiming at the federal legislation. They're aiming at the states because it's a lot easier to try and manipulate state parliaments than it is the federal parliament. And that is why we are seeing it happen in South Australia. We'll see it happen in New South Wales. There's campaigns that are currently running in Queensland. David Crisafulli has essentially put a gag on any abortion talk because of what happened just before the last Queensland election, but it is bubbling away in the Sunshine State. and it'll bubble away as an undercurrent. And I think that anyone who is interested in social justice should look at what is happening politically with abortion as a forewarning of what the election campaign federally will be like, where we start seeing trans issues imported and subject to the same sort of political tactics that we've seen in the United States and the United Kingdom, where we start seeing more attacks on the LGBTIQ community as a whole, and of course where we start seeing migrants. It's all part of the same message testing. It's all part of the same political project, which is essentially to give conservatives bad guys and to give conservatives more control over general populations.
So the Australia Institute did some polling to reveal what Australians' attitudes are to abortion. What did that show, Hamdi?
So the results showed that at a national level, 87% of Australians support abortion. This included 3 in 5 Australians, or 62%, who supported access to abortion without restrictions, and a further 25% that supported access to abortion with some restrictions. Only 8% of Australians don't support abortion access.
And what about when it comes to voting intention?
The highest support for abortion access without restriction was amongst Greens voters at 82%. But even when we look at One Nation voters, we find that at least half of them support access to abortion.
Without restriction?
Without restriction, yeah. And a further 34% supported access to abortion only in limited circumstances. When we look at rural and regional and metropolitan Australians, we find that 90% of people that live in the country support abortion, and only 5% don't support abortion. So
at all, yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty clear, like regardless of where they live, political affiliations, Australians support access to abortion because abortion is healthcare.
And Amy, we've seen federal One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts say that he wants his party to seek a total ban on abortion. Pauline Hanson seems to have a bit of a different approach, but you've talked about importing kind of tactics and messaging from the United States. Is that what's going on with One Nation as well? And do we expect, now that Tony Abbott's back at the top of the Liberal Party, we might see some of his influence there as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think what's happening with One Nation around the abortion messaging is just quintessential One Nation, where, you know, they basically make up policy on the fly, and you can ask any One Nation candidate the same question and you'll get, you know, a whole bunch of different answers because they don't tend to have those sorts of policies nutted out. Malcolm Roberts has always been more of the conservative bent. That's part of the reason why he's the person who's speaking to the Christian lobby groups about these sorts of things, and then Pauline Hanson and others wait to see whether it's popular or not, and then they come in over the top with, you know, what they consider the policy to be for that day. It obviously changes. And also, it obviously has the support of Barnaby Joyce, who is, you know, attending these rallies. And so One Nation is doing what One Nation does, which is tell different people different things depending on what works for them in that particular moment. And they don't really care whether or not there's any sort of cohesive policy around it, because they don't need to appeal to everybody in Australia, just to the people who are listening to them on that particular grievance. And so abortion is part of the grievance harvesting that One Nation does, and they'll continue to do it. In terms of like what we're going to see, I think kind of more broadly from the debate, I think kind of just more of the same but more intense. And this is this is the first time in modern history where we're not all seeing the same news. We don't all have the same information. We're not operating on the same set of agreed facts. And because our news algorithms are just as siloed as our social media algorithms, we don't actually know what information the people around us are receiving as news, inverted commas. And that makes it really difficult to try and predict where debates go, because once they hit the mainstream, obviously you see a whole bunch of players attach themselves to it. But there's always this undercurrent that is going on that we can't really see below the surface when it comes to a lot of these issues, because they are happening away from eyes and ears that would be interested in what is happening so that they can combat it. And that is one of the things that we're going to see, not just with One Nation, but also the coalition, particularly the Liberal Party under Tony Abbott, who we know has very conservative views about this, who we know is very, very focused on bringing his version of Australia to the fore, and who we know is going to use the Liberal Party presidency, which is supposed to be an administrative role, but who is going to use it to basically put Plan Tony across Australia and across the Liberal Party more broadly. But we're also not necessarily going to have eyes on what is being said to the branches, what the Liberal Party is and its support network is putting out across the algorithms, and where they are actually going to be linking with One Nation to push this message. And so that's why everyone really does need to stay alert. All politics is local, and that means that people need to be alert to these issues more than ever, and actually have these sort of conversations with people about what they're hearing, where they stand on things, to sort of do their own, I suppose, like testing the waters within their own communities, because Australia is shifting. We're at an inflection point, and all of these debates that people thought were settled, you know, even with all of the polling, it doesn't so much matter in this sort of volatile environment. And there are a lot of people who are actively trying to exploit that volatility, and they're going to be using emotional issues like abortion to do it.
Hamdi, to finish up, I want to turn to the reality of abortion care in Australia. Last week, the Australian Institute released some research into abortion care in South Australia, where we have publicly available statistics that we can study. And basically what it shows is, even though abortion is legal, it doesn't mean it's accessible to everybody. What did the data show in South Australia?
So the data showed that overwhelmingly people that live in country South Australia needed to travel to Adelaide-based clinics to access abortion care. What our data shows is that 8 out of 10 people are needing to travel to city-based clinics. And just one clinic performed almost 70% of all abortions across the whole entire state. Now, that's pretty inequitable. Like, this is not fair for people that live in the country. They shouldn't be needing to travel all the way to Adelaide just to access basic healthcare that is available to people that live in city, within city limits.
And Hamdi, what did the data show was happening when it comes to telehealth, which is kind of, I guess, only come up as a way to provide healthcare since COVID that most people are aware of? How many people are making use of that in South Australia?
Very few people are making use of telehealth services to access abortion care. In the data for South Australia, it was less than 1%. Telehealth is an important means that we could make abortion more accessible to people in country areas. So telehealth is only available for these early sort of medication abortions.
So not that many people in South Australia are accessing abortion via telehealth, but really it's such an important way to provide care, because we know that there's few, I guess, healthcare decisions that are so impacted by being able to access the care that you need in the time frame that you need it as abortion, and not being able to access, for example, a medical abortion where you just take a pill could be the difference between being able to take a pill to end a pregnancy and requiring surgery, which is obviously much more complicated, many more health implications. What were some of the things that the government could do to make abortion healthcare more accessible to everyone in South Australia who needs it?
Yeah, so there's a few ways that the government could make abortion more accessible to everyone that needs it. So one way would be to actually support the local GPs and health practitioners that live in these country areas to deliver abortion. While researching this report, I actually found out that a lot of health practitioners and GPs don't even know that it's within their scope of practice to give out medication abortion. And then also the telehealth services are underutilized. So less than 1% of abortion utilized through telehealth services. So expanding the awareness of telehealth would actually provide better options for people that don't live within the city limits. So this could be through expanding clinics that are already providing care. So this could look like a dedicated hotline in, for example, the clinic that I said provided almost 70% of abortion care in South Australia. They are already providing the care. They could just have more staff, a dedicated hotline that could allow people to access telehealth abortions.
And Amy, where do you think things will go from here? Is this only just going to get more toxic?
Yeah, it will get more toxic because of that volatile political environment that we're currently in. And the politics of emotion, the politics of grievance play really well for particular cohorts at the moment, where they're able to basically just play off people's anger and emotion about issues and use that to try and exploit them politically. So I think we will see more of this. I think that by and large, Australians do start to push back when the threat becomes very real. So I think the more that we see anti-abortion legislation pushed through the parliaments, the more people will be activated into defending the healthcare that they believe in. And polling suggests that this is something that Australians do believe in. And we are not as fractured as the United States, but that doesn't mean that we're immune to it either. So I would suggest that anybody who cares about access to healthcare, who cares about choice, and who cares about autonomy, to stay very alert to these issues and have those conversations with your own community, just so you know what is out there, and so we don't reach the point of the United States or the United Kingdom when it comes to these sorts of culture wars.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us this week, Amy and Hamdi. And I'll just finish with my personal opinion, which is that I totally understand not everyone supports abortion or agrees with it. And that's great. Just don't have one and stay out of it for everybody else. Thanks so much. If you'd like to read more about efforts to restrict abortion in Australia, or to read up on the polling that the Australia Institute released on views on that issue, we'll leave some links in the show notes. And if you want to support research that powerful interests fear, you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Australia Institute's end of financial year appeal before the 30th of June. You can give now via the link in the show notes. This episode was recorded on Friday the 19th of June, and some things may have changed since recording. Our theme music is by Jonathan McPeat from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.